Thank you for auditing Professor Skye's Record Review, the only first listen new music review show hosted by a French professor in front of a fire in a very Irish sweater. Today I'm going to be answering a question that I'm asking myself. Why the hell am I reviewing Bach? Why am I reviewing Thomas Pennick's version of the Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1? Matter of fact, this isn't just one question. This is three questions. I have three very good reasons not to review Bach. Especially not today, especially not this week. As my poorly made fire goes out, I'll have to watch and see if it comes back to life. Number one reason not to review Bach. This is a new music review show. It's all about experiencing and exploring new music. The Well-Tempered Clavier is from like 1722, 1720, around there. Bach's been dead for hundreds of years. The reason why, and I'll get to it, it's that this edition, the one that came out this week by Thomas Pennick, is so good, is so exemplary, it deserves fresh ears. Let's ask the question a second time. Why the hell am I reviewing Bach? Let's talk about this channel. As I've discussed recently, my video about the Strokes exploded over the weekend. I now have over 1,000 subscribers. They're not here to watch me talk about Bach. But this is the thing. If I'm going to have any success, I have to follow what I do. And what I do is I talk about music the way I want to talk about music. I have to have faith that if I ever build an audience, it's going to be an audience that wants to hear me say what I think. So I have to keep doing what I'm doing. I want to show you something. This is every weekend I do what's called the shape of the day for my kids, where I say everything we're going to do and then I check it off. And you see right there, Poppy video, Strokes and Bach. I wasn't even going to do the Strokes over the weekend because I usually don't get a lot of views like on the weekend, ironically. I was just going to throw Bach in there just to let it be forgotten. But I got to keep doing what I'm doing. That's the Professor Skye promise. Also, celery soup, it's surprisingly good. I made it myself, chopped up the onions and everything, like a real Frenchman. The reason I think that this is particularly a bad idea for me is the last video that I did about Bach has only gotten 10 views. It is my least viewed video of all time. But I think that's because I put a curse on the video. You see behind me, besides the slowly dying fire, you see this picture of Bach up here. Well, I thought it'd be funny to compare Lil Pump and Bach at the same time. Make like kind of a funny joke video. And so I put Lil Pump's face over Bach's face. I think that put a curse on my video. I'm going to lift the curse. Goodbye, Lil Pump. Time for you to get it out of here. We'll just go back to Bach. And finally, and this is the most pressing question. Why the hell am I reviewing Bach? What gives me the right to review Bach? It's not new music. I've done it unsuccessfully before, and I am ignorant. Now, I love this word ignorant, and I'm a language teacher, so I can't tell you about the word ignorant. Stupidity and ignorance are not the same thing. Ignorance really comes from the Latin root of not knowing. It's not the same thing as stupidity. See, ignorance, if you know about it, can be a gift. You can give yourself the gift of saying, I don't know something. You can be scared by that ignorance and hide away, or you can embrace the ignorance and seek to combat it through curiosity. So that's what I have been doing with Bach. For the past 5-10 years, I've tried many different ways of understanding Bach's music. I'm just going to say Bach. I'm not going to try and pronounce it properly. There have been two sources that I've really relied on. One, my ex-girlfriend of several years. She's very private, so I won't say her name. But she had a doctorate in piano, and she loved Bach, and she could explain him to me in a way that I understood. The other way is through the great courses of all things. For all of you autodidacts out there, this is actually quite good. Bach and the High Baroque by Professor Robert Greenberg, who I would put up as one of the great musical communicators of all time. He's a complete blowhard, but oh my God, is he really good at communicating classical music and what makes it great and interesting. He came up with a simile once that is like the best simile I have ever heard. He was describing Beethoven's, I believe it was string trios, and he compared them to Olympic badminton. Because like badminton, you think you understand it, but then you see Olympic badminton, you're like, I don't get it. That's Toby. He's gonna bark for a little while. So, that's, Toby, it worked on the last video, but it can't work again. All right, I'm gonna have to pause it and come back. It was a delivery. So, between my ex-girlfriend and Robert Greenberg, I feel like I have enough knowledge to try to share my passion for Bach with you. Think of me as a guide, but not some kind of super expert guide who knows everything, okay? I take my students to Montreal every other year, okay? And so I've been to Montreal like 10 times, maybe more in my life. I know it pretty well, and I can give a tour of Montreal that makes you love Montreal. But I am not an expert in that city. I have never lived there. I've never paid a utility bill. I don't know all the restaurants. I don't know all the neighborhoods. I don't know all the streets. If you want to go to Montreal and love Montreal, I'm your guy. If you want to go to Montreal and really know it on the deepest level, find someone else. I'm going to try to treat Bach, I have to pronounce it that way, I can't help it. I'm going to try to teach you and to share with you my love of Bach. I'm going to take you to the best poutine place in all of Montreal. La Banquise, by the way, very good place. And by that complicated metaphor, not quite as good as badminton, by that complicated metaphor, I mean the well-tempered clavier as the way to enter and learn to love Bach. So now that we've established that I probably shouldn't make this video, let me tell you how I'm going to frame it. I'm going to answer the questions. Why the hell am I reviewing Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier by Thomas Pennick? Number 1, I will tell you why Bach. Number 2, I will tell you why the Well-Tempered Clavier. And number C, why Thomas Pennick's version that came out this week. First of all, why Bach? If you don't know much about Bach, you can just kind of throw them in there with Beethoven and Mozart and just kind of think they're kind of all the same. It's not really a fair case. He really is sort of the beginning, the earliest of all these sort of great composers. And if you are a classical music scholar and you want to contradict me, feel free, put it in the comments. I am not upset by you correcting me. But to my understanding, he's sort of the beginning of what we consider Western art music or classical music, the first sort of big name. But the thing is that, I'm a 17th century scholar, right? And he was born in the 17th century, born in 1685. A point which is important, and I'll get to very soon, as you hear Toby running around the house. He's a very disruptive puppy today. So the thing is that in the 19th century, the Romantic movement happened, and our conception of what makes an artist really changed. Figures like Van Gogh became the sort of model of what we consider an artist. The other day someone was asking me, do you have to be crazy to be a genius? Of course you don't. You don't have to be tortured. You don't have to be burned by your father for 10 hours a day for 3 years. You don't have to be addicted to methadone. You don't have to have killed somebody. But in the 19th century, these romantic, I don't mean romantic like kissy-kissy, I mean romantic like the idea that everything needs to be like in a novel, has to have some kind of story, grand arc, huge passion. This belief, I think, has actually destroyed art to a certain degree. It's made people feel as though you need to suffer in order to make great art. Bach didn't. Okay, his first wife died, but he remarried. He was happy. He had a lot of kids. They made good music. He was a workman. And he worked really, really hard. He constantly wrote. And almost everything he wrote is blindingly good. Our tendency, there's a movie that came out a couple years ago, 20 years ago now, called Immortal Beloved, about Beethoven. It's this huge, romantic, sanguine thing about his deafness and how he's tortured and all this. You have to get yourself out of this 21st century, this post-romantic standpoint to think about what a great artist can truly be. You can be untortured and create art as great as anybody who is the most possible tortured. The thing about Bach that makes him so fascinating is he's this great and brilliant mixture of completely up in his head and then coming from his heart. So much of his work is mathematical to a point that I don't understand math either, so I get lost. So much of what he writes is based on these complicated musical compositional theories about relationships between keys and notes. I don't even want to really get into it because I'm so outclassed by it. I hear it. I bought this book based on the recommendation of Greenberg called Bach and the Dance of God. I didn't understand a single thing in it. So he works on this really high level. But it's interesting because he was Lutheran, and because of that, and because of the fact that most of his employers were the church, he ended up like having to reject inciting passion. That was actually a belief, that if you incited passion, you were taking people away from God. So how do you make great music without inciting passion? And it's what makes Bach's music so great is this tension where I don't care what you say. You listen to his music, you are completely transported. You are moved just as much as anything by Beethoven or anything by Miles Davis or whoever, right? Or the Beatles, right? Like you're taken away, you're moved. But it's always with this like mathematical precision mixed with this amount of restraint that if he went too far, he would literally get fired, lose his job, and die. If he went too far in inciting passion, that's where he would go. Another thing about Bach that makes him so important is that he was the master of counterpoint. Now, I want to kind of go on a little theory here. Listen, if my channel is going to work, it's going to work because of the way that I think. So this is just the way I think. I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit distracted right now. Toby is now about to hump Bo. I have 2 dogs. Boy, it's really hard to record a video with those 2 around. So this idea of counterpoint, or polyphony, another word for it. So the idea is this: you have one melody, and then you have another melody of equal importance that's completely different, and you play them at the same time. This is so complicated. It's actually difficult to listen to. Part of the reason that I like this well-tempered clavier so much is that it actually really is an easiest possible way to listen to counterpoint. But just think about the level of difficulty that's involved here. The complexity that's all kind of wrapped into this idea that you have to have 2 melodies at the same time. I have this trick. I do this thing that you can't do. Trust me, you can't do it. I'm going to show you. Okay? It's this. Okay? You can't do that. You can try it right now. Go ahead, try it at home. Doesn't matter who's watching the video. Okay? You're going to try and you're going to go like this. I can do it. Okay? This takes a long time to learn how to do. Go back and forth and back and forth. There's something in the brain that happens. Polyphony, counterpoint, is kind of like that. Like, how do you have 2 different melodies happening at the same time? Have them sound harmonious, have them work together, and how in the world can you possibly play it? It's like a level of complexity that the human brain, I don't think, is fully capable of embracing. And yet, here he is, 1722, making this music that uses polyphony in such a great and accessible way. I am now going to go on one of my favorite pet theories. This is completely out of left field, and I don't entirely believe it, but I want to get to this weird thing, this weird fact about history. Okay, so I would put forth that polyphony and counterpoint is the thing that took music and made it as rich and as interesting as it can be now. I think that was the thing that was necessary to make all music better. In 1685, Bach was born, okay? So we'll just take that one little connection, okay? Bach was born in 1685. Bach perfected counterpoint. I believe Bach's usage of counterpoint helped to spread it and helped to make music more complex and listenable at the same time. I'm getting to pop music, by the way. I'm getting to the Beatles, okay? How did the Beatles get so great? How did we arrive at this point? I think part of it is there. The other thing that happened in 1685 is Louis XIV passed le Code Noir, the Black Code. This was put forth by Colbert, and what it was a codification of slavery laws, okay? So it said a lot of bizarre and contradictory things. Like it said that slaves are Catholic. They're to be baptized. It also said that upon the death of the master, the slaves are to be treated like furniture. As my friend Pierre Bras once said, this means that according to Louis XIV, slaves are Catholic furniture. But most importantly, in this black code, slaves were given Sunday off. How bizarre is that? How bizarre is it that Sunday, that you own somebody and you make them work for your profit, yet they get Sunday off? What was a result in the French colonies of Sunday being off? Well, one result was in Louisiana. On Sundays, the slaves would get together and make music. They would take the polyrhythms from Africa and bring them to America. As I often say to my students, if you like drum beats, thank Africa. That's where drums come from. That's where polyrhythm comes from. That's where the beat in modern music comes from. Jazz was born thanks to the Code Noir. This is my theory. There might be 1,000 reasons why this is wrong, but I believe it checks out. If the slaves were not allowed to congregate in New Orleans on Sundays, they never would have created jazz music or the foundations of jazz music to come. Modern music then springs from that collaboration and the mixture of European-style melody play and African-style drums. I don't think we could have modern-day pop music, rock, hip-hop, blues, anything, if it weren't for this mixture of things that happened in 1685. I don't know. But I love the complexity. In the same way that I love listening to polyrhythms, I love listening to polyphony. And much like it, I can't really do it. I mean, I can do this, but I can't really pull off playing two different melodies at the same time on a piano, or I can't sing a different melody that I'm playing on. It's really hard. And polyrhythms, it's really difficult to keep those going, even playing with somebody else. So here we have all of this complexity and beauty all together in Bach. And you just kind of throw them in. Oh yeah, Bach, Beethoven, Chopin, all the same thing. One thing that I've learned by studying Greenberg and having a long, successful relationship with someone with a doctorate in music is the way we perceive of classical music is completely bunk. It would seriously be like, oh yeah, like first of all, the term classical music doesn't even apply, right? This is Baroque music. And in general, classical music was a very specific period of time in what we call Western art music. That's what you should call classical music, but we don't. It would be like, you know, if I played you some, if I played you some Lil Pump, and said, "Hey, listen to this folk music." They're like, what? It's not folk. Yeah, we just call it all folk, rap, hip hop, jazz, blues, pop. It's all just folk music. So, the strength of Bach, for me, is his resistance to this romantic idealization of an artist who's still capable of moving you while completely engaging your intellect and, for me at least, engaging my heart as well. Now, what is it about? That's the first question I needed to answer. Why Bach? Now, why the Well-Tempered Clavier? Well, partly it's because my parents had a copy of it, and I just remember laughing at the title. The title, it just means, clavier just means keyboard. Well-tempered is a kind of tuning. Don't look that up on the internet. You'll just get totally lost. I think my fire's dead, eh? Come on now. Come on now. You're gonna look so much better for the video if you're... Oh well. It's okay. So, you know, well, don't look up well-tempered because there's a whole argument about what it means. But the basic idea is a keyboard. And it's interesting because that could mean organ. Later, that could mean piano. That could mean synthesizer. You could play it theoretically absolutely anywhere. But what makes this particular work so interesting is its approachability. What he does is he has two short pieces. You can't say songs because songs have to have lyrics in them. Other than that, don't call them songs. People with music doctorates get really mad at you if you call them songs. Two pieces, okay? So we have a prelude and a fugue. And I'll get into the difference between those in a second. one for each of the 24 major and minor keys. So it starts in C and goes to C sharp, C minor, all those things. I don't even know all the 24 keys. My ignorance is profound. But because of that, each song is like, Jesus, I just did it. Each piece is 2 minutes long, 2-3 minutes long, very approachable. It's sort of a single idea in a single key. And when he wrote them, it was actually not so much to be listened to, but to be played. They're sort of like ways of helping people make sure that their keyboards work and that a player can learn how to play. This is from his prologue to the Well-Tempered Clavier that he wrote in 1722. He said that they were, quote, for the profit and use of the studious musical young. Okay? So like a lot of these are very simple. And also for the special diversion of those who are already skillful in this study. So it's both simple to be approached and played by children, but then also, very complex. This is like great children's literature or deceivingly good poetry that doesn't use big vocabulary. E. E. Cummings or something, right? Like where you're like, oh, I understand this. I can read you. Whoa, this is so deep. And it's his ability to work on both of those levels. So each of these things has a prelude and a fugue. Prelude and a fugue. The prelude is less interesting to me. It just feels like he's goofing around in this key, finding interesting melodies, finding interesting ways of playing. That's fine. It's the fugues where things get really interesting and where that combination of heart and mind really come together. See, a fugue, am I really going to try to describe a fugue? I'm going to describe a fugue the same way I will tell you about, the Nelson's obelisk in Montreal, okay? I know some, not a lot. But just let me share my passion with you, because I have a passion for fugues, even though my ignorance is profound. So each of these fugues is all based on this concept. Fugue means like to fly. So like things fly away and fly back. Fly away and fly back. And it's based on this subject, which you can think of like a melody. And that's this thing that's played. And the easiest way to appreciate a fugue is simply to listen for the subject and all the different ways it comes back and all the different places it's played on the keyboard. Because it's played all over the place. And it's played in different ways. And sometimes it's played backwards and sideways. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play you one of these fugue subjects for you to get the idea just how simple it can be. So there you go. Just starts with this subject, and you get that subject in your head, and then you keep listening. And what happens is this mathematical game starts happening where he then writes something called a counter subject, which sort of plays underneath and is that other melody that goes along. And then he'll bring back the subject in other keys, and then he'll bring it back in the lower register and the higher register, and he's playing it all the time. Then you hear the counter subject, and everything just gets wilder and wilder. And you keep hearing it. Oh, okay, now it's all simple. But now then something else is happening down here. This is the sort of counter subject, and then thing goes away, and then just the notes come back, and it'll play parts of the subject and take away other parts of the subjects. And it's an amazing experience. And the more that you study it, the more rewarding it gets. I often say there's no such thing as a boring sport. There's just sports you like and sports you don't understand. Like, I don't like competitive bicycling. But that's just because I don't understand it. I'm sure if I studied it, I'd love it. I think fugues are a similar way. Like the more you study them, the more you get into it, you just get lost in the beauty and complexity. Because this is the thing Bach has to do. He has to do something that's basically just like an exercise, almost like a rudiment, like a paradiddle a drummer would do or something. But then he makes it transcendent. How the hell does he do this? He doesn't cut off his ear and kill a prostitute. He just sits down and writes it. It's so great. So, all these fugues are all based on the subject and the counter subject, and they develop, and that's what I was getting into there. They have little development sections, and then they restate it, and then at the end, he usually does this thing, which I don't like, called the Picardy third, where everything just gets resolved. I don't like it. That's my number one least favorite part of Bach. But the thing is, this right here, Well-Tempered Clavier Book 1, there's 24 of these fugues. And they're very connected to the preludes. Like the prelude that came before this announced the subject ever so slightly. So you can just listen to, do what I do. Some days I just pick one prelude and fugue and I listen to it 2 times, 3 times in a day. And I just get into the world of it, and I just get into it, and I listen for the subject, and I try and see what's happening. I try and follow the polyphony, and I try and figure out what he's doing. And I let it inhabit my whole body and mind. And it can really do that. So that's why Bach. That's why Well-Tempered Clavier. Now, why this edition? Why am I risking all of my subscribers unsubscribing immediately? I might have to bring in my dog at the end just to save this. I actually haven't fed them yet this morning, so it wouldn't be too hard to get Toby to come over here. So why Thomas Pennick? So this is the thing. It's kind of like a Goldilocks thing that happens, where Goldilocks tries one porridge and it's too cold, another one's too hot, and the one is just right. The thing with Bach and with Baroque music and with classical music is how faithful do you stay to its form? Like, how faithful do you... Bach probably, I don't think he ever played a piano, or if he did, it was a really bad piano, because pianos were a later invention. Most of the time you hear Bach played, it's on a piano, which makes sense. Pianos speak to our expressive desire, our desire to have this emotion and dynamics. But Bach didn't have those dynamics. He had harpsichords. He had organs. So some people will just get like an absolute, they will get a harpsichord from 1722 or imitate it, and you listen to it. And so if it's played on piano, it's too modern for my tastes. It's not respecting of what Bach was capable of doing without appealing so directly to emotion. But at the same time, if you listen to it on a super busted old barely tuned harpsichord that's completely authentic, it's too alien. I find that I can't listen to it. I can't, even organ. Organ in person is great, but listening to organ on record or on CD, the inability to sort of have any dynamics in every note that's played, because a piano, that's what makes it so great, is it has delicacy to it, whereas an organ is just you press it and it makes a sound, and that sound doesn't change. So what Pennick's version is it's a harpsichord, but it's a harpsichord, I think it's I watched the interview with him, he said he bought it in the 80s. Whatever it is, it has a certain dynamism to it, a certain sustain, a resonance, and it's recorded with the absolute best possible fidelity. I don't know what they did. I've listened to the Well-Tempered Clavier, 5 or 6 different ways. And this is the first time I heard it in harpsichord, and I got completely transported by its beauty. I really feel that this is the best possible entry point for all Western art music. Right here, this Thomas Pennick's harpsichord version of Well-Tempered Clavier that came out in April 2020. 400 years later? Does my math check out? It might be 300. I don't know. I'm not that great at math, as I've mentioned a couple times. So this is the exact sweet spot where there's enough sustain, there's enough feeling in the harpsichord, but not too much. And the sound recording is just right. I checked with my ex-girlfriend. I said, this is a good recording, right? This is a good performance. And she said, yes, this is excellent. So it has the stamp of someone who knows much, much, much more than I do. So there you go. I've done my Bach video. Will it get more than 10 views? Probably not. But if my channel is anything, it's a place for me to come and talk about music. Should I do a half-an-hour video about Lil Pump next? Let me know in the comments. Toby? Toby, you want to come say hi? Come here, Toby. No? Here, you want to see Toby? See, that's a dog who's waiting to be fed. Bo? That's a dog who just wants to sleep. All right. Well, until next time, for the ghost of Franz Kafka, for Bach, Louis XIV, Colbert, Lil Pump, and of course Toby. There's the camera. Watch. Good boys.